everyone again. The subcommittee on state foreign operations and related programs will come to order. I'd like to start by welcoming our distinguished guest for his first time before our subcommittee, Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Now, as the hearing is fully virtual, we must address a few housekeeping matters first. For today's meeting, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. And let me remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies during Q&A. If there is a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You will notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I may gently tap the gavel or I'll raise my hand to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time is expired, the clock will turn red and I will begin to recognize the next member. And now after the panel presents their testimony, we will follow the order of recognition set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member. Then members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in order of seniority. And finally, members not present at the time the hearing is called to order. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. So once again, let me just welcome our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Secretary Blinken, our country, we're truly fortunate to have your determined, effective, and respected leadership at the helm of the State Department, especially during this time of tremendous upheaval and discord. Thank you for your service to our country and for being here today. One of my priorities as chair is finding new ways to better engage the American public in global affairs, especially communities and people who have historically been felt, at least, disconnected and marginalized from foreign policy. This begins with making sure that Congress is able to play its full role in foreign policy decision making. In our first conversation after your confirmation as Secretary of State, you expressed your desire to make the State Department more open and accountable to Congress. It's still early in your tenure, but I've really been very pleased to see clear evidence of your efforts and look forward to working with you more on this effort, which is critical to ensuring that we have a foreign policy that reflects the values and priorities of all Americans. The tools of diplomacy and foreign assistance have been undervalued and under-resourced for far too long. Today's hearing will provide members of our subcommittee a timely opportunity to hear directly from you how diplomacy and foreign assistance can effectively be utilized to respond to the growing challenges around the world. First and foremost, of course, is bringing the COVID-19 pandemic to a close, which includes the rapid distribution and administration of vaccines and helping the developing world recover from the pandemic's devastating impact across all sectors. I'm especially eager to hear the latest on the administration's efforts to make vaccines available in low and middle income countries. And of course, one of my priorities as chair is eliminating longstanding barriers to diversity that exist in our foreign affairs workforce and that perpetrate a system where minorities and women are chronically underrepresented. I know you share this goal. Your recent appointment of Ambassador Winstanley as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer is a very positive step. Nevertheless, previous secretaries of state did not effectively tackle the deep-rooted institutional and structural barriers to diversity at the State Department. And so I'm anxious to hear how you will hold yourself and the rest of the building accountable to finally breaking through and putting in place long-standing and effective solutions. I'm also eager to discuss the administration's approach to traditionally under-prioritized regions of the world, including sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean. Additionally, I am also concerned about the lack of action on Cuba policy, which in my view has not had the level of priority that I had expected. We need to turn the page from the previous administration's outdated and counterproductive policies and return to engagement and dialogue to resolve our differences and to press for change. What I see so far is just the opposite. And so I'm especially anxious to know the rationale for not reversing the last-minute listing of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism by the Trump administration. And Mr. Secretary, the recent outbreak of conflict between Israelis and Palestinians was and is deeply concerning. And I want to just thank you for your work in achieving the ceasefire. The last 4 years have been extremely difficult ones for the Palestinian people. The previous administration's cruel and irresponsible policy resulted in closed diplomatic missions, the suspension of humanitarian and development aid, and unprecedented levels of mistrust and resentment toward American involvement in the Middle East amongst the Palestinian people, let alone further setting back. And I really believe that the setting back of the cause of our cause for a two-state solution really did occur in the last few years. And so I appreciate the president's commitment to restarting our assistance to the Palestinians, to advancing prosperity, security, and freedom for both Israelis and Palestinians in tangible ways. The fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021 enacted SFOP's bill included for humanitarian assistance and development programs in the West Bank and Gaza, which were passed without controversy or partisan debate. I'm pleased that your fiscal 2020 request proposes $218 million for such assistance, although I believe that we can and we should do more. Also, I'm pleased the administration is renewing diplomatic focus and resources to the Northern Triangle countries. The halt in our assistance during the previous administration not only set us back from addressing the root causes of migration, it cost critical time and credibility needed to make progress on human rights, economic opportunity, combating corruption, and upholding the rule of law. Nevertheless, before committing to a 4-year and $4 billion plan, which includes $860 million requests this year, Congress needs to really understand how we will measure progress and ensure long-lasting impact, particularly on combating corruption and impunity in the region. The Biden administration budget also includes a commitment to restoring America's standing in the world through robust engagement with the United Nations and funding for the World Health Organization, UNFPA, and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, among other international organizations. I fully support efforts to reinvigorate our multilateral partnerships so that we are better positioned to tackle today's global challenges from COVID-19 pandemic to climate change and the many secondary impacts of both. Before I conclude, let me just say I'm also very disappointed that over the last 4 years, the United States has not paid its full United Nations peacekeeping assessments and that we have accrued over $1 billion in arrears. And so as chairwoman, I'm fully committed to partnering with the Biden-Harris administration on meeting our annual assessed payments, paying down our United Nations arrears, and putting in place a realistic solution that prevents this type of staggering dereliction of responsibility by the United States again. Mr. Secretary, it's clear we have much to discuss today, but I want to thank you again for your tireless work on behalf of the American people, your leadership and dedication to the most pressing foreign policy issues of our time. I hope this is the first of many discussions between you and the subcommittee, and I look forward to your testimony. And now I'd like to yield and turn the time over to our ranking member, Mr. Rogers, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the subcommittee, albeit at a distance. We want to thank you for being able to be with us to answer questions about your budget request for fiscal 22. You know, each year when the Secretary of State comes up to testify before this subcommittee, I reflect upon the seemingly endless global challenges and am struck by the number of complex problems the Secretary of State must address on any given day or even hour. This year in particular stands out given the number of crises around the world testing our country's foreign policy. And I would say, Mr. Secretary, you have your work cut out for you. But we are here to try to help any way that we can. And we thank you for being willing to answer our questions. The request for fiscal 22 is 61.96 billion. That's an increase of more than 11%, almost 12, from the fiscal year 21 enacted level. While I oppose the sweeping cuts to the State Department put forward by the previous administration, I'm also concerned about the magnitude of the increases being proposed in this request. I intend to give it fair consideration, but budgets of this size will be difficult to justify given our country's unprecedented deficits and debt. In addition, increases in the president's budget for this bill and other non-defense programs appear to come at the expense of our military. I hope the committee will carefully consider the potential consequences from these kinds of trade-offs as allocations are decided. Mr. Secretary, although I believe this budget request has some seriously misguided priorities, which I will address in a moment, there are a number of things I applaud for in your proposal. I appreciate that the request fully funds the enacted level for Israel's foreign military financing at $3.3 billion, and I was pleased to learn the administration supports additional funding to replenish the Iron Dome and other depleted systems. They were essential to preventing massive casualties in Israel from Hamas' aggressive rocket attacks last month. I'm also pleased to see funding maintained without conditions for Egypt, another key partner in the Middle East. I may return to Egypt in my questions, but I was glad to hear they were given credit for their role in helping to end the recent conflict and of your productive meeting with President al-Sisi. Turning to embassy security, the funding is maintained at current levels, which is a notable improvement from the two previous administrations. You can count on my support in remaining ever vigilant in the defense of U.S. personnel and facilities overseas. I also support the increased funding you're seeking to counter Chinese malign influence. Unfortunately, the environmental policies and projects in the president's budget will significantly disadvantage the United States against China. Under the deeply flawed Paris Agreement, our economy will suffer while China can do whatever it likes. I'm also disappointed to see, Mr. Secretary, cuts proposed in the budget for Jordan and Colombia, two key strategic partners that need our support now more than ever. I also have serious concerns with the approach taken in this request for the United Nations and other international organizations that appear to have abandoned any efforts at reform and burden sharing while doubling down on the funding. The unprecedented actions against Israel at the UN Human Rights Council and the ascension of Syria and Belarus to the World Health Organization's executive board are just two recent examples of how deeply flawed and dangerous some of these international bodies can be. There are other concerns that I will try to address in my questions, but before I close, Mr. Secretary, I want you to know that I take my role in providing oversight of your department very seriously and have for the last 36 years. I value the work of the Inspector General, and I hope you will too, especially in addressing chronic management challenges at your agency that persist year after year. To that end, I was very pleased to learn that the position of Deputy Secretary for Management and Resources was finally filled. Hallelujah. It's been a long crusade, but I'm glad to see, Mr. Secretary, that you've seen the wisdom in that position. The department has sorely needed someone at the highest levels to focus on the daily business of managing both operations and assistance, freeing up the secretary to do the policy chores that demand most of his time. I spoke with Deputy Secretary McKeon shortly after he came on the job, and I look forward to staying in touch with him as we go along. Mr. Secretary, let me conclude by thanking the men and women of your department, foreign and civil, as well as the locally employed staff advancing American leadership abroad. I salute their dedication, want them to know their sacrifices are appreciated on both sides of the aisle. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being open with us. You pledged early on that you would communicate well with the subcommittee, and this is a really good start. So thank you for being here. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Let me just say, I don't see the chair of our Appropriations Committee with us, Chairwoman DeLauro, or our ranking member, ranking member Ms. Granger. I don't. If they attend, we'll definitely stop and yield to them for any questions or statements that they may have. So first, Secretary Blinken, I know that, as I said earlier, you shared our goal of addressing longstanding failures to diversify the State Department workforce. So ultimately, it's an issue of institutional accountability. And so I'm just curious as to how you are going to hold yourself and the entire department accountable for making real progress on this issue, and what specific reforms are employed now and in the next 3 to 6 months, because I know, and some members on this committee know, how long we've been trying to get the State Department to address racial equity, gender equity, inclusion. And so I know there's some systems that may need to be reformed, but also we have to put some accountability measures and some initiatives in place to make sure that the strategy for targeting underrepresented minorities and women in the Foreign Service and in everything the State Department does, that we move forward. So can you just kind of share some of your specific ideas on this?
Chairman Lee, Ranking Member Rogers, first of all, let me just say what a pleasure it is to be with both of you and all the members of this committee. And Madam Chairwoman, I'm happy to submit my opening statement for the record, if that's what you'd prefer.
Sure. Well, no. You know what? I'm sorry. Go on and give us your opening statement, at least for 5 minutes. I jumped the gun on asking.
Okay.
You can include your answer if you want to in your opening statement.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And again, it's really a pleasure to be with both of you and all the members of this committee. And I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about the administration's proposed budget and how it will help achieve our national security priorities and deliver results for the American people, which is our common objective. I do think this is a critical moment for the United States and our global leadership. As you both alluded to, we face major tests, including stopping COVID-19, rising to the challenge of the climate crisis, supporting a global economic recovery that delivers for American workers and families. We have to revitalize our alliances and partnerships, outcompete China, and defend the international rules-based order against those who seek to undermine it, renew democratic values at home and abroad, and push back against malign activity by our adversaries. In a more competitive world, other countries are making historic investments in their foreign policy toolkit. We need to do the same thing. That's why in this budget, we requested $58.5 billion for the State Department and USAID for fiscal year 2022. And Ranking Member Rogers, I just want to point out, I'm already saving you some money right there. I think it's $58.5 billion. So I've been responsive to your concern. And let me just give you some specifics about how we plan to spend these funds if you support them. First, the budget will strengthen global health. The United States has been a leader in this field for decades in Africa, around the world. We're asking for $10 billion for global health programs, including nearly $1 billion for global health security to help us prevent, prepare for, and respond to future global health crises so we can stop outbreaks before they turn into pandemics that put our safety and prosperity in danger. This budget will accelerate the global response to the climate crisis by providing $2.5 billion for international climate programs, including $1.25 billion to the Green Climate Fund to help developing countries implement climate adaptation and emissions mitigation programs, which is directly in our interest. The budget would double down on the fight for democracy, which, as we all know, is under threat in too many places. The budget request includes $2.8 billion in foreign assistance to advance human rights, fight corruption, stem the tide of democratic backsliding, and strengthen and defend democracies. For example, through technical training for elections and support for independent media and civil society. It also requests $300 million for the National Endowment for Democracy. The budget will support a comprehensive strategy to address the root causes of irregular migration from Central America. It will invest $861 million in the region as a first step toward a 4-year commitment of $4 billion to help prevent violence, reduce poverty, curtail endemic corruption, and expand job and educational opportunity. It will reestablish American humanitarian leadership with a request of $10 billion in assistance to support refugees, victims of conflict, other displaced people, and to rebuild the refugee admissions program. It will support our partners in the Middle East by fully funding our commitments to key countries, including Israel and Jordan, and by restoring humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people. It includes a budget request of $3.6 billion to pay our assessed contributions in full to international organizations, initiatives, and peacekeeping efforts, including to restore our annual contribution to the World Health Organization. As China and others work hard to bend international organizations to their worldview, we need to ensure that these organizations remain grounded in the values, principles, and rules of the road, that have made our shared progress possible for so many decades. Finally, to deliver in all of these areas, the budget will reinvest in our most vital asset, our people. It will provide new resources to recruit, train, and retain a first-rate, diverse global workforce with nearly 500 additional foreign and civil service positions, the largest increase in state staffing in a decade. And it will modernize our technology and cybersecurity, protect our embassies and consulates, and include a direct appropriation of $320 million for consular services worldwide so we can continue to provide these vital services to Americans and those who seek to travel, study, or do business with the United States. Our national security depends not only on the strength of our armed forces, but also our ability to conduct effective diplomacy and development. That's how we solve global challenges. Forge cooperation, advance our interests and values, protect our people, and prevent crises overseas from turning into emergencies here at home. And that's why diplomacy and development are smart investments for American taxpayers. A top priority for me as Secretary is to restore the traditional role of Congress as a partner in our foreign policy making. That's the spirit that I bring to today's conversation, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity and the chance to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Let me just mention a couple things. First, I want to reiterate, I'll be calling on members based on seniority of the members that were present when the hearing was called to order, alternating between majority and minority members. And then I'll recognize any remaining members in the order of their appearance, and each member is asked to keep their question to 5 minutes per round. So, Secretary Blinken, you heard my first question prematurely. I would love to hear your response.
Thank you. Making sure that we have a workforce that looks like the country it represents is a top priority for me. And I've said both publicly as well as privately that I will consider it a measure of the success or not of however long I'm in the job, whether we succeed in putting in place a much stronger foundation to have that workforce that looks like this country. You noted that we appointed the first Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. That's an important gauge of the seriousness and purpose that I'm bringing to this, but let me just speak briefly to the challenge writ large, including the mandate of that office. We have to tackle this, and we will tackle this in a comprehensive way, starting with work that needs to be done before anyone gets anywhere near the doors of C Street. That is, with recruitment, and that has to start a lot earlier than it presently does. In part by opening minds, especially in traditionally underserved communities represented in the department, to the possibility of having a career serving the country and serving our foreign policy. And so we're going to be engaging even more, and I hope more effectively even, with high schools, colleges, universities, especially those that serve diverse populations. And that's going to start with me, but it's going to be an expectation that I have of the team across the board. Second, once people get into to the C Street doors, that's not enough, because the problem, as you know very well, that we've had is that we do bring people in and then they leave. We have a serious retention problem. And that starts with a need to have genuine inclusion. This can't be a check the box numbers game. It actually goes fundamentally to the culture of the department and the way we understand and act on the different challenges that our colleagues coming from different backgrounds and different communities may face, and that honestly, many of us may not fully understand or appreciate. And that is going to be part of the work of the Office of the Chief Diversity Inclusion Officer too, to help us better understand that. We're also going to incorporate that into the Foreign Service Institute's training. Third, I think you're going to see that in the appointments we make to senior positions, again, a better reflection of the diversity of our country, because it is vitally important that when people start out at the department, they can imagine having a career that leads to the most senior jobs. And if they are not seeing colleagues who come from the same backgrounds or communities that they do, then that vision is not going to be there, and they may not stick it out. Finally, we need to have accountability. And one of the things that I've asked the Chief Diversity Inclusion Officer to do, and that office, because it is an office, to do, reports directly to me as Secretary. We're going to have actual numbers, analysis, understanding. We're going to try to disaggregate data in ways that we have not done effectively in the past, so that we can understand and we can show whether, in fact, we are making progress in having a genuinely diverse department. Last thing I'll say on this. Our greatest strength, it's a cliche, but it's true. Our greatest strength as a country is in our diversity. And that's all the more true when it comes to our foreign policy, because we are dealing with an incredibly diverse world. And as the ranking member said, the sheer multiplicity and complexity of the challenges we face has probably never been greater. It would be to penalize ourselves not to have as full part and partner in our foreign policy a true reflection of the diversity of our country. We're going to be much more effective in engaging the world when we have that. So I'm determined that we show real sustainable progress, and I think we're putting in place the tools to do it. The Chief Diversity Inclusion Officer is developing a 5-year plan for this that we will share with you, and I think that'll be ready in the weeks ahead.
Mr. Secretary, I appreciate that, because in trying to develop a closer collaboration, I really do want to look at the plan and work with you on it, but also just know that I want to see something 3 months, 6 months, because this is such a long-standing issue. 5-year plan is great, but we have to have benchmarks throughout this 5 years. We can't wait that long to have a State Department that reflects the country and the aspirations of people who really would want to enhance our presence in the world. So thank you again. I'd like now to yield to Mr. Rogers, our ranking member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, the department's request for UN and other international organizations includes an increase of $630 million over the current level. That includes costs associated with your plan to rejoin several international organizations, to pay arrears, and to pay peacekeeping dues above the statutory rate of 25%. a cap that has not been changed by the Congress since it was negotiated during your time at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. A little over a week ago, the UN system demonstrated why there is so much skepticism and concern about continued investments in the absence of significant reform from top to bottom. On May the 27th, the UN Human Rights Council took the unprecedented step to open an investigation against Israel for alleged war crimes. You are asking for resources that will end up funding that effort. And the American taxpayer is right to be outraged. One day later, on May 28th, Syria and Belarus were elected to the World Health Organization's executive board. Now, a murderous regime and a desperate dictator are part of the governance structure of the World Health Organization, as if the list of problems at that organization was not long enough. U.S. officials could have called for a vote and voiced objections, but instead they did nothing until the deal was done. Mr. Secretary, your administration has acknowledged the deep flaws at many of these organizations, but you propose the United States to rejoin with payment in an effort to make change and see better results. How can we believe that you'll be able to make or even attempt to make any changes at these organizations when we just witnessed a failure to act on such an important matter?
Thank you, Ranking Member. I very much appreciate the question. Let me just say one thing at the outset. I do think that repaying our arrears and also trying to be current is very important in these organizations because it goes directly to our ability to have influence. When we're not paying up, we're listened to less, and it also goes to their operations and their ability to do the job in ways that advance our own interests. But we can come back to that. I think with regard to the Human Rights Council, with regard to the World Health Organization, it's our judgment that we stand a much better chance of advancing the important reforms that both need. I strongly concur with you if we're at the table as opposed to outside the room. And when we're not at the table, someone else is. And you alluded to a couple of countries in one case who might be. We can think of others who also would be. And our ability to actually advance meaningful reform to shape the way these organizations work is gone. And so with regard to the Human Rights Council, we're going to be a candidate for membership for 2022 to 2024. Last time we were actually in the room at the table, we were much more effective, for example, in dealing with the bias against Israel and one-sided actions that the Human Rights Council takes to single out Israel unfairly. We cut by about 30% the number of such initiatives when we were there. When we're not there, these things, unfortunately, tend to proliferate. And I think with regard to the World Health Organization, we stand a much better chance in actually advancing the vital reforms, I strongly agree with you, that are needed if we're there and making good on our commitments and then insisting that it make good on its responsibilities.
Unmute, Mr. Rogers. Can you unmute?
Am I on?
Okay. Now you're on.
I've got only a few seconds left. Is it possible to ask for another minute? I didn't hear you.
Yes. Go right ahead. We have an additional minute. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I was pleased to see that the President's budget request maintained the current level of funding for Egypt because they're a critical partner in the Middle East. That U.S.-Egypt relationship is complicated, but very important. I was in Cairo meeting literally with the President, al-Sisi, when the two church bombings happened on Palm Sunday in 2017. sometimes I think we lose sight of the very real terrorist threats they face there and continue to face. You met with President al-Sisi recently following the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. To the degree that you can, tell us about the role Egypt played in helping to end the recent conflict, and tell us of your view of the U.S.-Egyptian relationship.
Thank you. Egypt played an absolutely vital role in getting the ceasefire. I don't think it would have happened without their engagement. It's as simple as that. Something that we've both appreciated and applauded publicly. And to your point, it also plays a very important role in Middle East stability, in countering terrorism. We have important defense cooperation that focuses on border challenges, maritime security, counterterrorism, and of course ISIS in the region. The affiliate there is wedged between Israel and Egypt in the Sinai and poses a very significant challenge. Egyptians forces are losing several people a week in this effort to deal with it. So Egypt is a vital partner in many ways. We do have real concerns about human rights. I had a very lengthy conversation with President Sisi about that in a very direct and honest exchange. I would say, and we've met with human rights defenders, civil society, and others. I think we've seen some progress in some areas, particularly religious freedom, as well as women's empowerment, dealing with gender-based violence, trafficking in persons. We appreciate that. On the other hand, when it comes to freedom of expression, when it comes to civil society, there are very significant problems that we need to address directly with our Egyptian partners, and we are. So we hope and expect to see progress there, even as we sustain this partnership that really is vital for our common security.
Okay. Can you unmute Mr. Rogers?
I'm sorry. I thank you, Madam.
Okay, thank you. I now will yield to Ms. Main.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming here today to testify, and congratulations. We are thrilled that you are here in this role and look forward to working with you on a host of issues and to work to ensure that the money that our committee appropriates is put to the best possible use and is equitably distributed through programs that lift up those who are the most vulnerable in the world. For my district in Queens, New York, one of the most diverse districts in our country, foreign policy is not just an esoteric issue solving far away problems, but many of my constituents have strong family and business ties to their countries of origin, and many of their families directly benefit from our foreign assistance. My first question is about divided families. As you may know, there are thousands of Korean Americans who were separated from their families in North Korea by war. These Americans have lived without knowing whether their spouses, children, or grandchildren are still alive. While there have been over 20 opportunities for divided families to have reunions between Seoul and DPRK, none of these reunions have actually included Korean Americans. Seoul, as well as other international organizations, has committed to helping facilitate the inclusion of Korean Americans in these reunions. Obviously, time is running out as these family members age into their 80s and 90s. Can you update us on how humanitarian issues such as this one will be included in any talks at any level with our allies in Seoul or with the DPRK? And in order for this issue to really get the attention it deserves, we need a special envoy on North Korean human rights. The former president did not appoint anyone to this position, which I really think was a mistake. Can we expect a nominee for this role expeditiously?
In answer to your second question, yes, you can, and we're moving forward on that. As you know, the usual challenges with vetting and everything make it some of these things a little slower than we'd like them to be or should be. But the short answer is yes. And with regard to family reunification, I am deeply sensitive to that issue and appreciate everything you've said, because at the end of the day, so much of what we do and we sometimes forget comes down to real human beings, to real people, and this is just heart-wrenching, knowing that people have been not only separated but don't even know the fate of their loved ones. So what I can pledge to you is that we will absolutely work on this, including with our South Korean partners, to make sure that the interests of Korean Americans who've been separated from families are reflected in the efforts that we make and that are made. It's, as you know, very challenging, and we don't know what kind of engagement we're going to get from the DPRK. But thank you for putting a light on this issue.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. And I don't have much time, but I just wanted to briefly address the international affairs budget, which broadly supports funding for gender equality and equity. But the 200 million Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund is the only amount specified. Given this wide swath of issues, do you think that the 200 million is sufficient? And how would the proposed GEEA fund complement or differ from other accounts that seek to advance global gender equity?
Thank you. We're trying to work on this through a variety of programs and approaches that hopefully will complement each other. We have, as you know, significant work that we'll be doing that's also reflected in the budget on combating gender-based violence, which has gotten worse under COVID for reasons that I think you know. We're also trying to make sure we have an emphasis on women, peace, and security, working to support the participation, the leadership, the empowerment in decision-making of women in peace and security issues. And then to your point, we have this proposed Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund that we're seeking support for in the budget to promote economic empowerment, to also help deal with gender-based violence, to support some of the underserved populations, and also some of the areas where there's disproportionate impact on women and girls, notably the pandemic, climate change, conflict. I think that that if this budget is approved, we are resourced appropriately. With technology, for example, we found that there's some things that we can actually do more efficiently than before. Having said that, if there are specific areas or ideas that you think we should be pursuing, I very much welcome having an opportunity to talk about that and making sure that we're resourced appropriately.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I will yield now to Mr. Diaz-Briard.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, good to see you, sir. Let me bring us to Venezuela. So I don't have to tell you that the Maduro regime continues to violate human rights. There are obviously no free and fair elections. Political prisoners are still held in captivity. There's a lack of democratic institutions, independent media, free and fair expression, and obviously continuous ties with anti-American terrorist groups and regimes. Am I to believe, and I hope I am, because I've read in different instances that those factors and maybe others mean that you will continue to support sanctions against the Maduro regime in Venezuela?
I'll repeat it. I'm not sure if I may have been on mute. The short answer to your question is yes. Not only Congressman, will we continue to support sanctions, but we want to try to work as effectively as possible with others to bring them along in increasing the pressure on Maduro and on the regime.
Well, look, that's good to hear, Mr. Secretary, and U.S. leadership matters, right? And so you're obviously aware of let me now go to a different country. The OAS Secretary has called an army of occupation of Cubans in Venezuela. Those same conditions that I just mentioned in Venezuela that merit the sanctions exist in Cuba. Are you aware of any of those conditions that don't exist in Cuba? And so therefore, why would we not be supporting sanctioning the Castro regime that on top of having those same conditions, they also have spread their influence in other parts of the hemisphere, including obviously Venezuela and Nicaragua. So I'm assuming that the answer would be the same, correct?
Congressman, when it comes to Cuba, this is something that this is a policy that we're reviewing very carefully. And as part of that review, we're seeking the views, including yours and other members of Congress, other stakeholders, people with different perspectives on the issue, whether it's in Congress, activists, journalists, faith-based leaders, academics, experts, inside and outside of Cuba, because we are really focused on trying to make sure that we think through and work through the best way to advance the goals that we all share, which is for a free and democratic Cuba.
I get that, Mr. Secretary, but you would agree that the same conditions that I just mentioned about Venezuela apply to Cuba, if anything more so, right?
I think there are differences in specifics between the two, but the overall concerns that we have, both with regard to the absence of democracy in Venezuela and the absence of democracy in Cuba, yes.
Good. I just, Mr. Secretary, I don't see how one could say that the conditions that exist in Venezuela, again, and they also exist in Cuba, if anything worse, and they have been there longer, then why you can then say that one merits sanctions and the other one doesn't, particularly when Cuba has thousands and thousands of, again, what the OAS Secretary calls the Army of Occupation of Venezuela. So just something to consider. I want to thank you, by the way, while we're speaking of Cuba, for providing the $20 million for democracy assistance to Cuba, something that I think is desperately needed at this time. You talked about in your opening statement about your budget support to democracy programs, and you also talked about free and independent press. I am concerned, however, about and very disappointed that less than $13 million was requested for the Office of Cuba Broadcasting. That's nearly $7 million less than what was provided in FY 2021. That was done by Congress in a bipartisan way. And again, the reasoning behind massive increases in other areas, and yet specifically targeting OCB. And again, I'm always concerned about why is the regime in Cuba somehow treated differently than other places around the world, including in this hemisphere. So if you want to, again, very concerned about that rather substantial cut from what Congress had done in the last few years.
Thank you. And look, I'll certainly take a look at that. We are, across the board, we're trying to make sure that we are as effective as we can be, particularly in these programs. We have other tools and resources that can hopefully help achieve some of the same results. For example, the Global Engagement Center, where we're asking for some additional resources, that has been very effective, for example, in rooting out some of the misinformation and disinformation, to include things coming from Cuba and from other anti-democratic sources. But we certainly, I welcome hearing from you, from your office, if there are ways you think we can do this more effectively. We welcome hearing it.
And I look forward to working with you. And I see that, again, the $20 million Democracy Assistance Program, that is a priority of yours, right? Great. Thank you. I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much. Now I will yield to Mr. Price.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. We welcome you to our subcommittee, and we appreciate your good work thus far. And I want to express support for many items in a very strong budget, including assistance for democratic governance around the world. I have a special role in this, I suppose, by virtue of chairing the House Democracy Partnership, our bipartisan commission that engages with parliaments in emerging democracies to learn from one another, to build their democratic institutional capacities. And I'm sure you're aware that democratic governance assistance from our government, from your department, feeds directly into our attempts to engage these parliaments and to improve their capacity. It means that this isn't just parliamentary exchanges. It means that on the ground, we're able to work to constantly improve performance and enhance professional capabilities. So we welcome the increased funding for democratic governance and for legislative strengthening in particular. does lead me to a couple of questions with countries that we have engaged with, and for very different reasons. Engagement in these countries has become much more difficult recently. I'm speaking of Burma and Afghanistan. Let me first ask you about Burma. Military coup there, of course, has been devastating. And among other things, it's effectively removed the country from international parliamentary engagement. I support the sanctions the Biden administration has already imposed on Burmese military officials and businesses. I wonder, apart from these ad hoc sanctions, what more can we do to affect the Burmese military officials and military affiliated businesses? How effective have these sanctions been? What would your judgment be? And are you working with our international partners to restrict the Tatmadaws' access to military equipment, financial support, whatever that might be done in the way of increasingly effective measures? What kind of engagement do you have with the National Unity Government? You have any plan to work with them further? And then how does the U.S. plan to conduct assistance programs? There are some in your budget in ways that do not benefit the military junta, does not contradict what local civil society groups have been urging, and as a matter of fact, does something to address the flaw in the previous government and in this government, that the flaw they share with regard to the treatment of the Rohingya.
Mhm. Yep. Very much share your deep concern. We need to see an end to the violence. We need to see prisoners released. We need to see Burma return to the democratic path that it was on. To your point, we have sanctioned coup leaders. We sanctioned major military affiliated companies supporting the military. We've been engaged in a comprehensive review of our assistance to make sure that we can focus assistance that gets directly to people who need it and does not get to the regime. We have stringent export controls in place, and we want to make sure that we are trying to build some support for civil society, humanitarian, and ethnic communities, and all of this in coordination with allies and partners, including ASEAN. One aspect of this is, and this is something I've been very engaged in, is trying to get countries that have investments or other economic relationships with enterprises in Burma that directly support the military and that it depends on as an economic lifeline, that those countries reconsider those investments and those relationships. And we're doing some work there. We're also very much supporting the work that ASEAN is doing. The regime agreed to a 5-point program that starts with getting an envoy from ASEAN to Burma to talk to everyone, including, of course, the National Unity Government and others. We're pressing to see that that happens. We're engaged with the government, with other members of the National Unity Government, with other members of the now opposition. Having said all of that, this is a really deeply challenging problem that's going to require a lot of work and a lot of international coordination. Finally, to your point about the Rohingya, I couldn't agree more. This has been a deficit not just of, obviously, of this regime, although they were among the worst perpetrators in the past of violence against Rohingya and other ethnic groups, but it was also a deficit of even of the democratic administration. And we're very focused on that as well, both and among other things, making sure that countries that have refugees among that community make good on their non-refoulement commitments, not to forcibly send them back to Burma, where they will encounter very, very difficult circumstances. So we're working on this across the board, but it is a hard problem.
Yes, certainly is, but we do commend your involvement, and there is a need to stay the course here and figure out ways to tighten the screws if we possibly can. I think that sentiment is widely shared. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Now I will yield to Mr. Fortenberry. I believe you're frozen at this point. Okay, Mr. Fortenberry, I think you're.
Is that better, Madam Chair?
That's much better.
If we find, I apologize. I'm having some broadband difficulty here. Mr. Secretary, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Madam Chair, thank you. Ranking Member, thank you for holding this important hearing. Mr. Secretary, let me start out by just commending you for two things you said earlier. First of all, you consider Congress a partner in foreign policy. I really appreciate that. I think this whole committee very much does. We're full of we're brimming with good ideas and want to help constructively meet challenges. Secondly, you talked about foreign policy is ultimately about people and places. I couldn't agree more. Ultimately about human dignity and creating conditions for flourishing of human life and stability. So thank you for those comments. I want to try to address, if I can, the Middle East Partnership for Peace Act, China and the WHO, as well as the Northern Triangle. Regarding the Middle East Partnership for Peace Act, Ranking Member Rogers mentioned Egypt. Thank you.
You're breaking up, Mr. Fortenberry.
About it.
You're in and out.
I'll unfold. Intended roadmap for peace, but road has to have a foundation. This Middle East Partnership, very general.
You're
okay.
breaking
Is
up,
it
Mr.
better
Fortenberry.
now? Is it better
Okay,
now?
that's better now. That's better.
I'm
now.
in and out.
Uh-huh.
Let me, Madam. Okay, I was referring to the Middle East Partnership for Peace Act. Any roadmap for peace needs a foundation. Chair Lowy last year picked up the legislation, got it into law. I'm so grateful for her leadership. As a part of this law, we're trying to do two things: enhance grant making through traditional people-to-people programs, as well as build out new forms of economic well-being utilized in development finance cooperation with equity partners for the benefit of both Palestinians and Israelis. A State Department has a lead coordinating role in this regard. Mr. Secretary, are you familiar with this law? How are you going to advance State Department's implementation? And thank you for funding it, by the way.
In short, Congressman, yes, very familiar with it, very much supportive of it, and we intend to do what we can to move out on it, because I couldn't agree more with the basic objectives and the basic premise. And particularly, we need to use some of these new tools like the DFC, which I think was a very good development, and look at ways of doing this more effectively. So I'd really welcome working with you and your office on this. It's something we very much support.
Mr. Fortenberry? I believe I will chair. Mr. Fortenberry, you still have a couple of minutes left. If not, we'll try to see if we can have a second round and go back to you. Are you back on?
I'm back on. Madam Chair, would you mind if I try to locate to another area and give me 2 minutes back? I'm sorry. I apologize. Thank you so much.
Sure. No problem. We'll go now to the chair. Then thank you very much, Madam Chair, for joining us. Chairwoman Rosa DeLauro, Chair of our Appropriations Committee.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and what a very, very excited about today's testimony. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us. And again, first time to be able to say congratulations. We're very excited about you and the role that you are in. I have a couple questions. In the funding request for 2022, the administration has talked about $10 billion for global health programs, $800 million increase to global health security programs, and it's over the 2021 amount. In January 2021, the administration announced it would re-engage with the WHO, and in 22 requests, there's the repayment of arrears to WHO and other international organizations. The $10 billion for global health programs, including an additional $1 billion, would expand the global health security agenda capacity building programs. So could you just tell us a little bit about how the funds will be used and which programs would be supported by these additional funds.
Yes, thank you very much. First, let me just say that this is really an effort to build on the very significant resources that Congress has provided over the past year in response to COVID-19. I think your leadership in trying to help address both near-term and long-term global health security challenges has been vitally important and is very much in line with the global health security agenda that we have. I think we need to be looking at this in two ways. One is COVID-19 itself, of course, and making sure that we are effectively prepared to hopefully prevent, and if not prevent, at least see and mitigate and deal with more effectively the next pandemic. So significant portion of these resources are dedicated to doing that and building much greater capacity around the world in this ability to both prevent, detect, and mitigate. Parenthetically, a senator by the name of Joe Biden, way back in 2003, 2004, had legislation called the Global Pathogen Protection Act because he identified way back then that various countries did not have in place the tools to be able to detect the outbreak of a pathogen turning into a pandemic. Unfortunately, that legislation never made it through. I'm very pleased that Congress today is really focused on this, and that can help give us the tools. So there's that piece. The broader global health security agenda is vitally important too, because one of the things that's happened during this pandemic is that other aspects of global health security have been significantly compromised because of the inability, for example, to effectively deliver global health services for a variety of other challenges, whether it's malaria, tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, and so on down the list. And so we want to make sure that we're able to address this deficit as well and build, and as we say, build back better with our global health security programs.
Well, my hope is that in light of what you said, the last portion of it, I understand Ebola, Zika, and now coronavirus, but the other piece of this is I think we need to, as we are looking to restructure our public health infrastructure domestically, I think we have to participate in a public health infrastructure worldwide as well. We do it with Africa, where it's similar to the CDC, et cetera, because we're not safe unless the rest of the world is safe from these, from these illnesses, the diseases, and so forth. So I want to work with you on that effort. I'm going to try to get another quick question is, we've got a number of crises around the world that threaten democratic institutions, the rule of law. And the budget you've proposed emphasizes the need to defend democracy, freedom, rule of law. Extremely important. And I know you're poised to play a critical role in crafting what the U.S. response is to these crises. How do you plan to carry out that mission in a way that achieves our objectives while re-engaging with our allies in a way that we did not during the previous administration?
Well, I think from our perspective, the first order of business has been to re-engage with allies and partners, both on a bilateral basis, but also in different institutions, because the challenge is twofold. I think if we look at pretty much any of the big ticket items that are actually going to have an impact on the lives of our people, whether it is this pandemic, whether it is climate change, whether it's the disruptive impacts of various new technologies that so shape our lives. I think the one thing we know is that we can't effectively deal with these challenges doing it alone. Even the United States, with all of our power and resources and know-how, we benefit from being able to work in cooperation and coordination with other countries to deal with these challenges. At the same time, we also know, and this is the other reason why our lean in on diplomacy and engagement is so important, we know that if we're not engaged, for example, in these very imperfect, but nonetheless important international institutions, then one of two things. Either someone else will be in our place, and probably not in ways that advance our interests and values, or maybe just as bad, no one is, and then you tend to have chaos and a vacuum filled by bad things before it's filled by good things. So I think there's a premium on our engagement, on our diplomacy, on just showing up. And I think we're in a better place to advance the needed reforms if we're actually, as I said, in the room and at the table than not even in the building. So that's the sort of premise that we bring to this, and we have, thankfully, and if we're resourced properly, I think even more so, an incredible resource here at the State Department to make sure that the U.S. is present, is engaged, is playing the lead role in shaping the norms, shaping the rules, shaping the standards that govern so much of our lives. That's what we need to be doing, and we're grateful for the support we can get for the budget to do it.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for indulging me going overtime, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
Now I will yield to Mr. Reschenthal.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lee. I appreciate it. And thank you for Secretary Blinken for being here today. I appreciate that as well. Secretary, in late March, President Biden supported calls for the 2021 MLB All-Star Game to be moved out of Atlanta, Georgia. And then literally just hours later, I mean, you can't make this up, within 72 hours of requesting that the All-Star Game be moved out of Georgia, he then came out opposing a boycott of the 2022 Olympic Games in Beijing. Secretary Blinken, why do you think the administration is silent when it comes to China hosting the Olympic Games, but is so outspoken when it comes to moving the All-Star Game out of Georgia?
Well, first, let me say one of the great benefits of my job is that I don't do politics. I'll just focus on policy. I have to tell you, I'm not aware of the president taking that position. But what I can say is this: with regard to the Olympics, we're consulting very closely with allies and partners to look at the common concerns that we have, and ideally to establish a common approach. That's what we're focused on right now.
Well, I mean, you have said that China has a host of atrocious human rights violations. And I think that Joe Biden thought that by pulling out of the MLB game somehow, it would send an overture that would support voting rights. There are no voting rights in China. It's a communist state. They can't vote. So even Speaker Pelosi's come out saying that she supports at least a diplomatic boycott of the games. Would you support a boycott of the Olympic Games in China?
Again, what we're doing now is consulting with other concerned countries and trying to make sure we understand their thoughts and perspectives on this. And then, as I said, developing a common approach, which will be much more effective than doing something on our own.
Well, you would agree that in the past, when adversarial nations such as 1930s Germany, such as when the Soviet Union hosted the games, that they then use that opportunity to then actually invade neighboring countries. Do you fear that might happen with China, that after these games are hosted, they would try to invade, let's say, Taiwan? Is that a concern?
Well, we have real concerns about the increased aggression that the government in Beijing has shown toward Taiwan. Whether there's any relationship or not to China hosting the Olympic Games, I couldn't say. We're focused on that, irrespective of the Olympics.
Okay, well, your administration has pressured corporate sponsors of the games to drop their sponsorship. I'm sorry, Biden has pressured corporate sponsors of the 2020 Olympic Games to drop their sponsorship due to human rights concerns. So the administration actually has taken steps on that. Secretary, Special Envoy John Kerry has taken the same tack against banks to divest and banks that discriminated against U.S. companies in the fossil fuel industry. So this tactic has been used not only on the fossil fuel industry, but also on the 2022 Olympic Games. Do you think that those further tools like that should be used to further put pressure on China?
As I said, I want to make sure that we are, from where I sit and given my responsibilities, that we are consulting with other concerned countries, that we understand their perspectives on this, and that we come up with a common approach. That's what we're focused on.
Thank you, Secretary Blinken. I appreciate it. And Chairwoman Lee, with that, I would yield back.
Thank you very much. I will now yield to Ms. Frankel. Mr. Secretary, your, at least on my iPad, you're blurred. Does anyone else have that?
Yeah, he's blurred, but
You're blurred.
I can
Okay,
hear
can you
him.
hear us, Mr. Secretary? Okay.
I can hear you loud and clear, and I think we're trying to correct.
Okay. Okay. We'll continue.
Okay,
as
I
long
think we're
as
trying to find another.
Madam Chair, as long as I can hear his voice.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear us, Mr.
Well,
Secretary?
now he disappeared. He
Okay,
disappeared.
We'll wait for just a minute while he's changing. Okay.
Well,
Okay.
I see
They're
him.
trying to.
Is he?
Yeah, they're trying to reconnect at this
He's
point.
waving.
You.
There he is.
Okay, we see you, Mr. Secretary. Okay, Ms. Franklin, go
Thank-
right ahead.
Th-
Okay.
th- Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good to have you here, and thank you for being here. Let me start just with a statement, then I have a couple of questions. I want to just say thank you for the $3.3 billion that maintains United States support to Israel. It is without conditions, and I believe it should be without conditions. So thank you for that. I know there'll be another 500,000 in a different budget. But I have some questions. Hopefully I can get to both of them in regards to family planning and education. And I might have to say, though I love most of your budget, I am a little disappointed with this aspect, and I'll tell you why. In terms of reproductive rights, I know that, and you probably know this, that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on women around the world, especially when it comes to reproductive rights and health. The United Nations recently estimated that 1 year into the pandemic, 12 million women have experienced disruptions in their family planning services. And what made it worse was under the previous administration, budget proposals consistently cut global health funding, and President Trump went even further by reinstating and expanding the very harmful global gag rule in a way that crippled global health assistance to women and girls, because it forced clinics around the world to choose between receiving U.S. funding or providing critical care and family planning services like access to contraception, HIV prevention, and maternal health care. And we know these are critical health services. I'm pleased that President Biden has rescinded the global gag rule. And although we don't know the full impact of the pandemic yet, we do know that the United States leadership in this arena is important. That's why I'm a little bit, I know you had a small increase in bilateral family planning, but I think and respectfully suggest we need a much, much robust increase. So my question to you is, given so much of the unmet need and what's going on around the world, how do you expect that we will, even make a dent in this unless we put more funding into international family planning?
Thank you, and I very much appreciate the question, appreciate the concern, and I share a lot of that concern, as you rightly said. We've seen so many devastating impacts of COVID-19, but in particular, women and girls have been harmed significantly in ways that others have not. I think part of the answer is that we are taking steps to resume funding to the UN Population Fund, and that is a very important vehicle for advancing these services to people in need and to women and to girls. So this is obviously a new development, and one that I hope will make a significant difference. There's $32.5 million dedicated to that proposition in the budget.
Thank you. Let me get just quickly to another subject, which also is related to the pandemic. A recent United Nations reporting estimates that over 11 million girls may not go back to school after COVID. And And that's, that is really sad. But your request, your administration budget reduces education funding. So maybe you could explain that, and more importantly, what is the proposed administration's efforts to get girls back into school and stay in school?
There too, I agree with you. I think this is vital, and the efforts that we're making to make sure that there is greater and meaningful access to education are really vital. I think that insofar as the budget goes, I think we found that there are ways, including with technology, to do some of these things even more efficiently, and I hope effectively, that can also be cost savers. And so we're looking at making sure we can do this in an effective way, in an efficient way. Having said that, if you think or see particular problems and that we're not effectively addressing or meeting, I'd welcome knowing those, and we can see if there's more that we can do on that count.
Thank you. Will do. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Very much. Now I will yield to Ms. Wexton.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us here today and for your service to our country. I want to preface my questions and my comments by mentioning that I represent one of the largest Uyghur diaspora communities in the United States. So their plight is very, very important to me and my constituents. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Xinjiang and the treatment of Uyghurs and other Turkic ethnic minorities. Because despite all the recent attention to this issue, the internment camps are still expanding. Products made with Uyghur forced labor continue to flood our markets, and stories of rape and forced sterilization in the camps are growing worse. And I agree that we should step up the pressure not only on the Chinese government, but also on the global corporations and institutions that are turning a blind eye to these gross human rights violations and even genocide. Now, I know that the administration hasn't yet made a decision regarding what to do about the 2022 Beijing Olympic Games. And I agree with you that it should not be about politics. But I just don't see how we can go on with business as usual while the host country is committing genocide. At the very least, we should be pressuring the IOC to move the games and not take a full boycott off the table. So there's no question right now, but I just want you to know that this is something that affects people on both sides of the aisle, and that the world is really watching us, and they're going to be, assessing what we do moving forward. Now, sticking with the Uyghurs, I am a co-lead on a bipartisan bill led by Representative Ted Deutsch that would give Uyghurs priority 2 refugee status, which, as you know, would give them direct access to the U.S. refugee system and kind of fast track them. Now, we've seen media reports that China is pressuring Turkey and probably other countries to crack down on Uyghur dissidents through economic pressure, and even threatening to withhold vaccines from those countries. And Turkey's parliament is even considering an extradition agreement with China that would make it easier to extradite Uyghurs. Is this something that the State Department is keeping an eye on, and what are you doing to help the Uyghurs in this situation and work with our third-party allies to ensure that they're not really susceptible to this pressure?
In short, yes, and thank you for flagging that, putting a spotlight on it. And I've actually raised this with my Turkish counterpart. We've also been very focused on making sure that Uyghurs who have made it to other countries, that those countries respect the non-refoulement obligations that they have internationally, and do not send people back to dire circumstances. I think across the board, as you know, we have worked to build a chorus of condemnation for what the PRC is doing in Xinjiang and to Uyghurs and other minorities. There have been joint actions and sanctions in coordination with the UK, with Canada, with the European Union that China certainly took notice of, given its reaction. We are focused as well on trying to make sure, to the best of our ability, that products made with forced labor in Xinjiang can't come here, and we're working to open the eyes of other countries to that as well. At the same time, we want to make sure that none of our companies are inadvertently or otherwise engaged in exporting technologies or products that can be used in any way to perpetuate the repression of Uyghurs or anyone else. And all of this is in the works. We continue to look for ways to bring to bear meaningful pressure on China to change its practices to stop the repression of Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities.
And it seems that it's accelerating, unfortunately, so we've got to step it up even more. So thank you. Now, I understand that the State Department has a number of useful resources to counter disinformation and misinformation. And I know a number of those are included in your budget. Specifically in China, what are we doing to counter the massive state-sponsored propaganda machine?
Yes, it's a really important piece of things. We have, as you know, the Global Engagement Center, which is, I think, an increasingly effective vehicle in finding and sharing and then acting on misinformation and disinformation, whether it's from China, whether it's from Russia, whether it's from many places. It's become the premier platform for sharing information about misinformation and disinformation with several dozen countries, including some of our closest allies and partners. And the budget request reflects the fact that we believe for the State Department, this is an important and increasingly effective vehicle to deal with that challenge.
I'm a big fan of the GEC, and I also think that Radio Free Asia is one of the best bangs for the buck in terms of countering disinformation and getting the Uyghur story out there. So I appreciate your continuing support of it. And with that, I'll yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't believe Mr. Fortenberry is back yet for his final 2 minutes, so I will yield to Ms. Torres.
I'm back. You're back,
Madam
Chair. I'm back. I think I'm back.
Okay, 2 minutes, Mr. Fortenberry, to complete.
All right. I'll see if I can do this without disruption. Sorry about that. Mr. Secretary, what I did here is that you're committed to implementing MEPA. Thank you, Middle East Partnership for Peace Act. I think it's a critical new architecture for, again, establishing trust and economic well-being with continuity, using the best of the private market system with a little bit of subsidy. So thank you very much for that. Let's talk about China and the WHO. There's increasing concern and a possibility that this may have very well come from a Wuhan lab. It looks like, obviously, if that was the case, that there was a massive cover-up by China and the WHO. I'd like to hear your perspective on this and how the administration is monitoring the developments in this regard, researching this possibility, and how China will be held accountable should the findings point in that direction.
Thank you. A couple of things on this. First, back in March, President Biden instructed the administration to, on a whole of government basis, look into what we could determine about the origins of COVID-19. And we had a report come back to us that basically narrowed it down to two most likely hypotheses. That is a natural occurrence from animal to human and coming out of the lab. But it was unable to conclude with any degree of confidence which of, if either of those was the most likely. And that inspired the president just recently to ask the intelligence community to, again, whole of government, bringing in expertise from the labs, from the National Institutes of Science, HHS, et cetera, 90 days to do everything we can to see if we can determine with any greater degree of certitude where COVID-19 originated. So that's one piece. The second piece is WHO. And I think you're exactly right that both with regard to WHO and with regard to the PRC government, from day one, we have seen a tremendous deficit in meeting the responsibilities that they should have been meeting, particularly with regard to the government in Beijing. Transparency, information sharing, access for experts, international experts. None of that happened early on, and when it really could have made a difference. And now, even with the report, the phase 1 report done by the WHO, we have deep reservations about the methodology used, and again, the lack of appropriate access and information sharing. And that's why this phase 2 report needs to go forward to see if it can actually get to the bottom of what happened. If we can't get to the bottom of what happened, it's going to make it so much more difficult to put in place the measures that are needed to hopefully prevent and certainly to better deal with the next pandemic. And that is also profoundly, one would think, in China's interest. So I think what you're seeing around the world is growing concern, focus on the need for countries, starting with China, to step up to their responsibilities. That's what we're looking for, and that's what the international community is insisting on. So that's how we're moving forward, both here in the United States and with the WHO. We need, and we're determined to get to the bottom of this.
And then accountability metrics after that, should the ugly side of this manifest itself.
We need to have accountability.
Thank
I'll
you.
yield now to Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's good to see you again, Secretary Blinken. Welcome to our subcommittee. I want to align myself with the comments made by my colleague, Ms. Frankel, on aid to Israel. I will focus my questions on Central America. Thank you for visiting the region. I hope to hear more about your recent trip to Costa Rica and the meetings related to the Northern Triangle region. I appreciate you appointing experienced and committed officials like Special Envoy Zuniga to tackle the issues in the Northern Triangle region. However, I must stress to you that we need strong experience and permanent leadership to represent our values and challenge undemocratic behavior along with partners in multilateral forum. Secretary Blinken, what is the timeline for naming ambassadors to El Salvador and Honduras? Ambassador Pop in Guatemala has shown impressive leadership despite the challenging partnership. How do you ensure that our ambassadors working in the region are not pressured and intimidated from the governments and elites, as we have seen in the past? And given El Salvador's recent actions that seem to have gone against the democratic charter, will you prioritize appointing a permanent representative to the OAS?
In short, yes, I think you're exactly right. We're determined to have the strongest people in place, both in those countries and at the OAS. With regard to El Salvador, as we're trying to work on getting an ambassador, we asked, and thankfully she said yes, we got Jean Maines back to El Salvador, who is an extremely
I cannot celebrate temporary appointments, sir. I must, demand that we do better by having, hopefully it'll be her, because I understand that she is a true tried leader that would do well, but not on a temporary basis. That is not acceptable.
No, I agree with you, and we are working as fast as we can to get people in place. As you know, the process, including all of the vetting, the confirmation process, is probably not as fast and efficient as all of us would like, but we are working through it with great determination.
I hope that my colleagues here, my Republican colleagues, will work with us in a bipartisan way to ensure that the Senate does everything in their power to prioritize appointments, ambassador appointments, confirmation to this region, as I know that they are so concerned about the issues that we have seen at our southern border as a result of public corruption, ingrained public corruption in the region. I was glad to see USAID suspend aid to the government of El Salvador instead reprogram it to civil society. We cannot give taxpayers foreign assistance to governments that misuse it to advance their own interest and act counter to our policy priorities and goals. So these problems, unfortunately, are not limited to El Salvador, as you very well know. Guatemala Constitutional Court used non-transparent processes to stack the court with judges who have clear conflicts of interest. The new court sidelined the only judge willing to fight for the rule of law, Gloria Porras. As you know, they've also wasted no time providing its priorities and reaffirming our fears it first overturned a ruling to allow a controversial law targeting civil society to move forward. And in the days before the vice president's visit, the court moved to dismantle FESI, one of the few remaining effective independent investigative bodies in the government. So how do we work with such a country that is doing everything possible, in their hands in order to work against progress in the region?
I engaged my counterpart in Guatemala on exactly those questions and concerns just a few days ago, and I know the vice president will be taking them up as well during her visit. Look, our strong preference is to be able to work with governments, but if the governments are unable or unwilling to do what's necessary to be an appropriate partner for the United States and for our taxpayer dollars, then we will continue, but work with, as we have in the past, with the private sector, with NGOs and with civil society, with international organizations and other implementing partners, with communities. And there are many ways of effectively delivering assistance and support that don't require working with a government that, for one reason or another, is not going to effectively use that support to do what we're trying to achieve, which is to actually help people make meaningful improvements in their lives. You know, when I was just meeting with the Central American foreign ministers in Costa Rica a few days ago, one of them said very eloquently, when it comes to dealing with the drivers of irregular migration, that, and we know what they are, and we know what needs to be done to address them, although it's not like flipping a light switch. It takes real time, real investment, sustained, but it's doable. That minister talked about there should be, in effect, a right to remain. People should not be living in conditions where the only rational choice they have, from their perspective, is to leave everything that they know behind, families, loved ones, language, culture, community, to make an incredibly hazardous journey here. And of course, our border is not open, so they're going to get turned back. We need to find ways to help countries actually give meaning to the right to remain, and that is better governance, fighting corruption, dealing with security, and especially opportunity. If people can put food on the table, if they can provide for their loved ones, they will make a go of it and try to build their own communities. That's what I think we can partner for and with. The private sector has a critical role to play in this. The vice president had a call to action recently to try to get even further engagement from the private sector. But again, I want to emphasize, and you know this better than I do, it's not like flipping a light switch. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of focus.
Madam Chair, I yield back. I apologize for taking longer.
Thank you. I'll yield now to Mr. Espaillat. Unmute. Mr. Espaillat, we need you to unmute. Can you unmute? Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, Secretary, thank you so much. I know that corruption and violence and all those negative aspects of rogue governments don't contribute in any good ways to the population that they're supposed to service and represent, and will contribute to migration patterns. But also the fact of the matter is that we sort of, as a nation, we have turned our heads away from Latin America and the Caribbean for far too long. I think that the leadership role that we need to play in that region, we have abdicated our leadership in that region for far too long. We wander all over the globe and right back in our backyards, and we're allowing other countries, in many cases, our competitors and our adversaries, to fill up that gap of leadership in meaningful, sustainable ways. For example, with important projects for the development of those regions. And for, of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic, Latin America has witnessed 30% of the deaths in the Caribbean, while they only make up 8% of the global population. And, you know, we have given money, and I know that there's been lots of money allocated, and finally the White House said that they will distribute the vaccine long after China has been snooping around and providing help in the region. So my question is, Secretary, I know that the department reported 153 million to Latin America and the Caribbean, although, as I said earlier, they make up 30% of the deaths. And for fiscal year 2022, you requested close to $1 billion. Is there any way that we're going to see an increase in funding going to those regions that are adversely affected by COVID-19 so that we can compensate for some of the time lost?
Very much appreciate the question, and I agree with you that we need and we are focused on our own hemisphere, on our own region. This is something that starts with the president, who, as you know, was very much engaged as vice president, particularly in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, also in Colombia, a number of other countries. I think with the COVID piece of this, let me just say a quick word about that. We needed to make sure that Americans are vaccinated, and we've made, as you know, major strides in getting that done. We now have 80 million vaccines in excess that we are pushing out very deliberately over the next weeks between now and early July. And a significant destination for those vaccines is, in fact, our own hemisphere, Latin America. And once those 80 million vaccines are distributed, we will have, by a factor of 5, shared more vaccines than any country on Earth, including China. China has sold vaccines in other places.
I understand.
In terms of actually sharing them by a factor of 5. And we're not stopping there. We will continue, as we have excess vaccines beyond July, making them available. We're doing it on the basis of equity, of science, of need, working with COVAX on a lot of this, which has an equitable distribution model, but also making sure we have in reserve the ability to target vaccines at the places most in need, where variants are popping up, where second shots may be needed, et cetera. And as I said, our neighbors are among the most important beneficiaries of that. I think that's going to have a real impact. Certainly, I've heard in almost every conversation I've had, including in the region, this request for help. Help is now there.
Good. I'm glad. These, as we know, Mr. Secretary, this pandemic has cycles, right? And there's some of those countries may be in their second spike, right? In their second cycle of the pandemic, and they've already lost hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, right? So they need that help as quickly as possible. My second question was regarding the appointment of our diplomats, and I share my concern with my colleague Norma Torres that I think that we should expedite the appointments of those representatives of our nation in that region in particular, which is right next door. The Caribbean is our third border, and we see what's happening in the border, in the southern border, and we need to address that. We need to have folks on the ground that will be able to address this as quickly as possible. Finally, my time is up. I thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for giving time to this committee.
Thank you very much. Okay, in the interest of time, Secretary Blinken, you've been very generous with your time. I'd like to go to 3 minutes per member now as we go to our second round of questions. I will start with this question. Mr. Secretary, ahead of your visit to the Middle East, I wrote to you to urge that the Biden administration reset U.S. relations with the Palestinians, which have suffered enormously over the last 4 years with policies that marginalize and really starve the Palestinian people of assistance and failed to address the underlying conditions that made it harder for Palestinians to see a dignified future. So now that you've returned from the region, could you kind of update us very quickly on what role the U.S. is playing in the international reconstruction efforts for Gaza, the realistic time frame for donor funds, also the time frame for reopening the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem, and finally, as Israel forms a new government, what, if any, assurances do you have that the new leadership will work to de-escalate tensions, such as avoiding and displacing unlawful evictions of Palestinians from their homes or further settlement expansion? We all know that this is essential to the security of Israel also, and still believe in a two-state solution and a path forward for a two-state solution.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. I share your perspective. Appreciated your communication and letter. Just a couple of things on this. One of the main purposes of the trip, besides making very clear our commitment to Israel's security and ability to defend itself, one of the other purposes of the trip was to truly restart our engagement with the Palestinian people and with the Palestinian Authority. We had already, before this crisis, as you know, started the process of restoring humanitarian, economic, and security assistance consistent with the law. And on the trip, I was able both to add to the assistance already provided to account for what had happened in Gaza, as well as on the West Bank, and to start the process of reopening our consulate, which is a vital platform for us to be able to engage Palestinians from all walks of life, as well as the Palestinian Authority. So all of that is in train. There's a process that we have to go through in terms of the consulate. Happy to share with your office exactly what that is and what the rough time frame we expect would be. Second, the urgency of two things: Gaza humanitarian assistance, water, electricity, sanitation, sewage, all of which are in very dire straits as a result of this this conflict. So we're really very much focused both in terms of the resources that we're providing, the resources we're getting others to provide, and the work that we're doing to make sure that can go forward as smoothly as possible. That's an intense focus for us right now. After that, we then need to focus on actual reconstruction and rebuilding, to do it in a way that elevates the Palestinian Authority and puts it in some pride of place in delivering that assistance, does not go to Hamas, and is done in coordination with Israel, Egypt, the United Nations, of course, front and center. So we're working to put in place the plan, the mechanism to do that, and to meet those different requirements. Finally, this cycle risks repeating itself if we are not able to meaningfully address some of the flashpoints that could come up going forward. And you cited several of them, whether it is the potential evictions of Palestinians who've been living in their homes for decades, for generations, whether it is some of the settlement activity, whether it is the way things were dealt with in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We need, whether it's violence committed by some in the settler community, those flashpoints need to be addressed. Similarly, incitement coming from incitement to violence from Palestinians, payments made to the families of those who have committed acts of terrorism, that all needs to be addressed as well. So our diplomats, our engagement is very focused on trying to make sure that neither side engages in actions that could light another spark and turn it into a flame. Then I hope that as we're re-engaged, we can start to build back some greater degree of trust, confidence, start to meaningfully improve people's lives, and then maybe see conditions emerge that makes the pursuit of two states more possible. Right now, the conditions are very challenging for that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being very candid, for your leadership. And also, I know many of us would like to continue to work with you on the path forward from this subcommittee. Thank you. Now I yield to Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we switch to Afghanistan? You've promised the full weight of American support in the peace talks if they move forward. But how can the U.S. help advance a political settlement without boots on the ground? What sources of leverage can be employed?
Thank you. It's an important question, and I think there are significant sources of leverage absent boots on the ground that can be and are being used. There are a number of things that the Taliban says it wants, to include international recognition, to include if it's participating in in governance, international support, and more in the nearer term. It's looking for things like prisoner releases. It's looking for the lifting of sanctions against its leaders, including at the United Nations. And all of those things we would have a significant voice in. Simply put, if the Taliban in any fashion tries to roll back the gains of the last 20 years, then it will be a pariah. And I don't think that that's in its interest. Beyond that, there's another dynamic that's important. A whole series of countries neighboring Afghanistan and a little bit beyond Afghanistan, which basically for the last 20 years have been free riders on our engagement there, now have to make very hard decisions about how to sustain their interests and how to use their influence as we remove our forces. None of them have an interest in a civil war in Afghanistan and the instability that would result, including possibly pushing extremism and drugs outside of the country and toward them. And so we are very much engaged with virtually all of these countries and are looking to see how they use their influence. Final thing I'd say, sir, is that even as we're withdrawing our forces, we are not withdrawing from Afghanistan. We're determined to sustain a strong embassy presence, programs to support Afghanistan, its people and its government, economic development, humanitarian, the security forces. All of that will remain. We're working with other partners to make sure that they remain as well, and that we stay deeply engaged, supporting the government, supporting the people. So I think all of those things are important levers that we can use and build upon.
Quickly on China, since 2013, China has been the principal source of fentanyl flooding the U.S. market through Mexico. In 2019, Beijing finally cracked down on the supply of fentanyl from China to the U.S., with China finally enacting new laws prohibiting the production, sales, and export of most fentanyl-class drugs. To what extent is China actually enforcing that law?
Thank you. We're looking at this very closely and very carefully because your point is exactly right. We have seen progress in actually putting in place laws and requirements. What we're now focused on is making sure that it's implemented, and I'm happy to come back to you with our best assessment of that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Now, I would like to yield to Mr. Price. I've been informed that the Secretary has a hard stop at 4:35 East Coast time. So for those who don't get a question, we'll be sure to have your questions for the record and get a response. Mr. Price.
Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you for your last two answers, both regarding Afghanistan and also regarding the Israeli-Palestinian situation and the steps that you have underway to reverse some of the damage from the last administration, where diplomatic engagement on the Palestinian side was essentially stopped and assistance was stopped as well. You plan to start this assistance up again, both restoring some of what was withdrawn earlier, as I take it, and also responding to the needs from the latest conflict. And welcome your indication of diplomatic vigilance with respect to provocations on either side, and certainly violence, incitement from the Palestinian side, but also settlement expansion and evictions and demolitions from the Israeli side. All of this profoundly unhelpful with the prospects for peace. And any elaboration you want to give on that, I would welcome. Your answer to Mr. Rogers with regard to Afghanistan also is a hopeful response. I hope you're right. I hope you're right that the diplomatic presence can continue to be and will be effective and will offer substantial incentives for the maintenance of the gains that the Afghan people have made and that we have made in engaging with their institutions of governance and other institutions of civil society. Let me very specifically ask you, you talk about our presence continuing. How will the shape of our relationship change, do you think? I mean, surely that will be different without the military there. And in particular, is there some kind of realistic prospect for continued engagement in governance, in supporting you have a good budget for governance? Is Afghanistan going to be on the agenda?
Thank you. And in short, yes. As I said, we are determined and working very hard on sustaining a very strong embassy presence and all the programs and engagement that goes along with that, including engagement with the Afghan government in Kabul, and including the various programs to support Afghanistan economically, humanitarian development, and the security forces, as well as enlisting others to make sure that they are doing the same and sustaining their own support. As long as we have the platform with the embassy and the women and men who are incredibly dedicated to this task, then I think the overwhelming bulk of our programming and support can go forward in a way that also provides the appropriate oversight that's necessary. So what we're working very hard on right now is putting in place all of the pieces necessary to do that.
We want to work with you on that. It's extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Price. Now I will yield to Mr. Diaz-Bayard.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your patience. 2 questions. I'll try to do them quickly. You know the challenges that Colombia is facing. They've been an amazing ally. They have made great progress against narco-terrorism, but now they're struggling with the humanitarian crisis across the border, et cetera. We all know about the demonstrations that took place. Do you and your administrations support the democratically elected Duque administration? And do they still can they still count on your support? And let me just, if you'd allow me, Mr. Secretary, to throw the second question, since we don't have a lot of time. In Haiti, the president has announced that I guess they're going to hold a referendum, a constitutional referendum in June. Obviously, many Haitians are concerned that may not be a free and fair election. So what are your thoughts about the upcoming elections and what potentially the State Department can do to promote democracy, the rule of law in Haiti, while still ensuring that obviously that crucial humanitarian aid continues to be used effectively? So again, 2 questions, and I apologize, but we don't have a lot of time.
Sure. No, I appreciate it. Quickly on Haiti, we oppose moving forward with a constitutional referendum. We don't think that can be done in the time frame suggested in a way that would make sense and be truly representative. We are looking to see whether what's necessary can be put in place to actually go forward with elections later in the year, but not the constitutional referendum. It would be important to get back to more representative democracy in Haiti and not rule by decree, which is what we've seen recently. So that's why there's importance to elections, but they need to be able to go forward in a free and fair way. There's an OAS, I think, as you know, there's an OAS delegation there almost right now that is looking at all of this, and we can report back on how that's going. With Colombia, I couldn't agree with you more. Colombia is a vital strategic partner for the United States. President Biden has been deeply engaged with and deeply committed to Colombia for many, many years, starting with Plan Colombia way back, then our strong support for the peace process and the agreement reached with the FARC in 2016. And now I just had my friend, the foreign minister and vice president, visiting at the State Department just a few days ago. And we remain deeply engaged with Colombia. The government's important efforts to bring together the various stakeholders in a real dialogue to address the concerns and grievances that have been expressed in these protests is very welcome and I think very important. So is its commitment to look into and provide accountability for any excessive use of force against people who are protesting peacefully and have the right to do so. But we have, as you know, a comprehensive partnership with Colombia, working on so many different levels that remains vitally important to us. The last thing I'd mention is the incredible generosity of Colombians when it comes to bringing in and supporting their brothers and sisters from Venezuela, including offering temporary protected status to them. As you know very well, the number of refugees is very significant, and yet we've seen tremendous generosity from Colombians. We are part of our budget goes to humanitarian assistance to make sure we can help Colombia support the burden that it's taken on.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back.
Thank you. Now I'll yield to Ms. Frankel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. Well, I guess this is my day to unburden my anxieties here. So I just want to say that I am very, very, very worried about women in Afghanistan, and I hope you're going to do everything diplomatically possible at your end to help them, those who have gained their rights, to maintain them and to keep them safe and secure. But I have another worry, and that is the rise of anti-Semitism, not only in our country, but around the world. Seems like every time there is violence in Israel, which in my opinion clearly was caused by Hamas, but we see this rise in anti-Semitism, and I'm interested to know what, if any, steps will the State Department be taken to combat and denounce it?
I very much share your concern, and we've seen, as you know very well, a significant rise in anti-Semitism over the last several years, and yet another spike, deeply disturbing spike now. As just one example, on social media recently, including in the wake of events in Israel, 17,000 tweets. Hitler was right. Attacks that we've seen here in our own country against synagogues, places of worship, that are deeply, deeply disturbing. I don't do the domestic piece, but when it comes internationally, we're seeing this in different parts of the world. We're very focused on this. As a department, we will be naming an envoy to full-time work on combating anti-Semitism around the world. That person should be forthcoming very, very soon. And in virtually, all of our engagements around the world, when it is necessary and appropriate, this is something that we're raising, we're putting a spotlight on, we're bringing up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to yield. Maybe let somebody else get a question in. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks very much, Ms. Frankel. Now I will yield to Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I hope the broadband is working better. Ms. Secretary, you made your position known earlier on this, but in good conscience, I must make mine known as well. And this is a sharp division on this committee, but we might as well put this out in the open. Regarding renewed funding for international organizations involved in the provision of abortion, as well as the UN Population Fund, I believe this is inconsistent with sound diplomacy. It is a projection of our own ideological divisions on the poor throughout the world, and it disrespects the cultural norms of other peoples. Look, you made your position known, but again, good fences make good neighbors. I don't obviously think we're going to work through this today, but I'd like you to be aware that there are a great deal of sensibilities in this regard. In this manner, though, again, getting back to the earlier question as to how we work successfully together on projects that we believe to be of mutual benefit for the entire world. I believe that regenerative agriculture as are real keys to development diplomacy. And in this regard, we've got a lot of new ideas doing, one of which is built a successful program like Farmer, where we're taking American expertise around specific technical areas and using, may not ever be a part of the Foreign Service or have the time to enter into the Peace Corps, but can provide special in forestry, in conservation, in diplomacy. Is this idea, well, diplomatic corps for enhanced surge capacity when you need it. Can you work with, we've got a lot, some of which are taking legislative form, and would love to have the opportunity.
And I apologize because you faded in and out a little bit, but I'm pretty sure I got the substance of that. And the short answer is we'd welcome working with you on that. And I agree with you. I think there is a lot we can do, and I'd really welcome getting your ideas on how we can do that more effectively.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I yield now to Ms. Wexton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Secretary Blinken. I think I'm the last person standing between you and being done after a very long day, so I really appreciate it.
I think we have one more member.
Okay, very good. Well, never mind. Still have a little ways to go, but I'll make it brief. You know, you recently told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that the State Department has 1,000 fewer employees than 4 years ago. Is that correct?
It is.
And have those losses been concentrated in any one area in the Foreign Service or in the Civil Service side?
Primarily Civil Service.
Okay. And I know that that's the result of a 16-month hiring freeze, but also as a result of a lot of attrition during the last 4 years. Is that correct?
That is.
So I was very pleased to see your proposed budget call for 485 new positions, which aren't really new positions, are there? We're just rehiring some of the people filling some of the vacancies that we've had.
Yeah, it's a combination. That's right.
And I'm glad that you're gonna look to fill these positions with diversity and inclusion that we haven't had historically. But how confident are you that we can meet this goal in the fiscal year?
We're determined to meet it. We need to meet it. We need to make sure that we are resourced not just financially, but in terms of our human resources to address many of the things we've had an opportunity to talk about today, particularly in areas where we really do need to strengthen our capacity, whether it comes to global health, climate, China, where we have a very significant program to increase the human resources dedicated to the different manifestations of that challenge. Emerging technologies, cyber, all of that demands not just people, but a certain amount of expertise as well. So we're trying to find ways to bring that in, as well as fill some of these gaps. We also have about a 10% or 12% vacancy rate overseas in our embassies and consulates. Some of that is seasonal as people are in between assignments. But we want to make sure, particularly in places of great importance, that we don't have gaps. We found temporary ways to deal with some of those gaps with temporary deployments of people, bringing back retirees, using eligible family members, for example. But we also are, for example, with our consular services, because under COVID, there, alas, has been a huge drop in demand for those services, which we need to build back. We do have some flexibility there where incoming officers some can be shifted to other assignments where we have gaps. So we're trying to use all these flexibilities, but it is critical for us to get the support we need to bring in these additional roughly 500 people.
Well, I wish you great success, and I think that I speak for the committee when I say that we look forward to working with you to help you do that. So thank you. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I know your time is up. I would like to see if we could just get on the record Mr. Reschenthaler's question and Ms. Torres' question, and then
certainly.
So be on the record, and then you can respond
certainly
to them writing. Thank you again. Okay, Mr. Reschenthaler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to yield my 3 minutes to Jeff Fortenberry.
Okay, Mr. Cordenberry, could you just ask the question because we're over time, and then I'll
Yes.
yield to Ms. Torres, and we'll get the response back.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Secretary, we have states around the country that have excess vaccines that are going bad. We can help donate those overseas. Like you to find a pathway to help us get that done.
Got that, and we'll follow up on it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll yield now to Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary Blinken, again. I agree with your comments regarding Colombia, and I want to thank you for addressing our concerns there. They are a very important anti-narco trafficking partner with us, so want to make sure that we investigate recent issues carefully. I want to continue our conversation around the Northern Triangle. How does the State Department ensure that U.S. funding is not misused, politicized, or used against our interests? I'm particularly concerned about foreign military financing in the budget, as we have seen the security forces in the Northern Triangle commit human rights abuses, support non-democratic actions, and even intimidate our own embassy. And I look forward to you addressing this issue in a written form. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Torres, very much for that. Thank you, members, for helping us with the time, keeping within the time frames. Mr. Secretary, you've been very generous with your time. Before closing, I just want to call your attention to a question that I plan to submit for the record regarding, and forgive me if I'm not pronouncing this right, Nagorno-Karabakh.
Nagorno-Karabakh, yeah.
Karabakh, okay, with the State Department. Your recent decision to extend the waiver to Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act, and I'd appreciate the State Department's prompt response. I don't believe our ranking member is still with us, and I'd just like to say thank you very much for being with us on behalf of our ranking member and myself, all of our members. You have such important work to do. I mean, the world is in your hands, and we look forward to working with you and your continued leadership. And if there's anything we can do to assist you during this process, please let us know.
Thank you so much. And my only addendum would be to say I think the world is in our hands collectively, and very eager to continue working very closely with this committee and other colleagues on this multiplicity of challenges. We're going to be so much more effective if we're doing it together. I'm determined to do that. I really appreciate both the substance of the conversation today, as well as the way it went forward. And I heard a number of really good ideas that we're going to follow up on, and look forward to working with you on those. So thank you.
Thank you again. The Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations and Related Programs remains adjourned. Thank you very much.